Welcome to the Pain-Free Comeback Program. In this video, Miriam and I are going to discuss the nocebo effect and its role in chronic pain. We want you to take away three things from this video. The first is understanding what the placebo and nocebo effects are and their role in chronic pain, the role that fear plays in the chronic pain cycle, and understanding how chronic pain is generated in the brain. So you probably know already, if you're an athlete, how powerful the mind is. Bill Russell, who's one of the greatest basketball players ever, said concentration and mental toughness are the margins of victory. I had a cycling coach who used to tell me the mind is more powerful than any muscle in the body. The power of the mind in athletic performance is a reason why so many teams these days are employing sports psychologists. But what you might not know is that the power of the mind, in the same way that it can make or break an athletic performance, it can also generate chronic pain. And to understand this, we need to understand the placebo effect and the nocebo effect. So you might have already heard these terms. The placebo effect is essentially getting positive improvement after taking a fake or a dummy intervention, like a sugar pill, for example. The nocebo effect is the opposite. And this one's a little less well known. It's actually having a negative effect after taking a fake treatment or a fake intervention. And we have a couple of stories that illustrate how this can, the placebo and nocebo effects can show up in the body. So Miriam, can you share that slide there? So there are a couple interesting stories that illustrate the power of the placebo and nocebo effects. First, placebo. There's a very interesting study done a few years back that tracked 180 people who were going to get knee surgery. They had osteoarthritis of the knee, and they were going to get arthroscopic knee surgery. So what they didn't tell some of the participants is that they weren't actually going to get the knee surgery. They were just going to get an incision, and they were going to just be stitched back up. So half of the participants were going to get a real surgery, half were going to get a fake one. And what was really interesting is they assessed the outcomes for function and for pain immediately following the surgery and up to 24 months, 2 years afterward. And what they found is that there was no difference immediately after the surgery or 2 years later in terms of pain or function between the two groups. Those who got the fake surgery, who just had the incision, same exact outcomes as those who got the real procedure. So that's the placebo effect, right?
Alec, and I assume that all of these people had the same knee problems, were diagnosed with the same knee problems, I would assume.
Exactly. They all had osteoarthritis of the knee. They had something, quote unquote, structural show up on an MRI or an X-ray, and they were all put into the study.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit about, how this can occur a little later. But there's another really interesting study that shows the opposite, the nocebo effect. So in this study, which was in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry in 2015, they wanted to measure the negative side effects from taking placebo medications or sugar pills. So what happens in a clinical trial is some set of participants will receive the actual medication that's being tested, and another group will receive a fake pill, and they're told it's the real one. Both groups will be told they can experience side effects from the medication that they're taking, even the placebo group. And what they found is that 2/3 of people who were taking the placebo, the fake medication, got the side effects of the real medication. 5% of them actually had to drop out of the study because these side effects were so severe, so strong. So in this case, fear and expectation are leading to a physical change in the body. And in the first story, you see this fake surgery giving just as good a results as actual surgery. In the second story, people getting a placebo treatment are receiving the side effects from the medication they thought they were receiving. So this speaks to the power of the mind and the brain can do the same thing with pain. So if you think about ways that you might be noceboing yourself, right? If you think my body's too weak to do this movement, or I need to be careful because I'm not strong enough to do this, it can have a massive effect on the actual pain or symptoms that you experience in your body. And Miriam, I think you have a story that illustrates that.
Yes, Alec, I in fact experienced the nocebo effect in full force myself when I had chronic pain, in particular when I had nerve pain in both my hands and arms, and I had no idea where it was coming from, because I was already inactive from my sports and from my active life, and because of other pains, and then I had developed this new nerve pain. And I remember I had visited a nerve specialist with years of experience, who was an old guy, really, to try to determine what was wrong. And all he did was he took my hand and he just made me try to apply some force, and he found it a bit weak. But I hadn't had any tests yet. I had had the tests scheduled to determine whether there's nerve problems, but I hadn't even had the tests yet. So all he could rely on were his like observations from a physical exam. And he told me, like, he asked me if I did any sport, and I mentioned that I used to climb before I had chronic pain. And the first thing he told me was like, no, 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 no. That causes so much damage to the body. You shouldn't ever do that again. And I remember I tried to ignore him. I already, like, a part of me already knew that I shouldn't listen, even though I had no knowledge about the nocebo effect back then. And as I remember, as I walked out of the clinic, he called out after me again, telling me, like, and you should never do that kind of sport again. And I remember, like, I was in tears. I tried to hide my tears because my mother was waiting for me outside. And I can tell you, Alec, the following weekend, I was swimming. And because I was missing the rock so much, I tried to hold on to the rock a little bit, as I'm swimming, like pretending that I'm at least touching the rock. And that day, the pain was incredible. I felt like I had shooting electric pains through both my arms and hands. The next morning, it was the same. I woke up in like shooting, electrifying pain. I had no idea what was happening back then, but it was right after I had visited the specialist. And it was only when I learned about this that I realized how much his words had impacted me. So I wouldn't wish the same thing on anyone, but unfortunately, this is so common. We get dire warnings from doctors or specialists, and we get scared. We get scared of being active.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
It's a powerful story, and I think the thing is, so many people can relate to that. Like, even just hearing you say that, I was reminded of the time when I had my back pain, and I had a physical therapist say, like, oh, you're bending at your lumbar spine and you're creating so much pressure on your discs, like, of course you're going to have back trouble. And so from that time on, I was always trying to bend at the hips, and just doing all of these things that were from somebody that I trusted. Like, in your case, you're talking about this doctor who has years of experience, who you trusted, and whose words deeply impacted you. And I think this is kind of where the role of mindfulness comes in, as kind of a gatekeeper to our thoughts, of not always just taking on the unconscious messages, blindly trusting people, because sometimes the messages, although well intended, like, I'm sure that doctor really had his best intentions of wanting to help you and protect you, but those well intentions might be doing more harm than good.
Exactly. And this is also very common with things like posture, for example. Of course, good posture is great for your body. But then we go to the extreme sometimes, and think that, because we're bending a bit incorrectly or different to the recommended way of bending down or sitting down, then we think we're going to be in pain. And that's so not true. I mean, there are thousands of people who have bad posture and who are not in pain. So we have to be really careful how much we take on these beliefs.
Yeah.
And yeah,
And I love a good study. And just to interject there, great study, 21,000 people, blue collar workers, who were trained to lift properly, because there's been so much about proper lifting technique for back health. Study 21,000 people basically showed that there was no difference in rates of back pain for people who learned to lift properly and those who didn't.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not surprised now, but
Yeah.
yeah, it is surprising the first time you hear about it. Yeah, and to proceed from that, I have a slide to share with you here. Okay, so when it comes to athletes specifically, there are certain situations that might induce the nocebo effect without our knowing. So one of them is, for example, the things that we hear from family and from other team members as well, especially. So if other team members tell us that, you know, they've injured a part of the body that's involved a lot in our sport, then we expect that we might easily injure or overuse the same area. In fact, the idea of overuse injury in itself is questionable. I mean, a lot of active people think that they might have an overuse injury, when in reality, what they're experiencing is chronic pain from the nocebo effect. So that societal condition is not just what we hear from team members, but also from other family members or friends who, in our best interest, tell us to be careful and not to overdo it. And our brain gets the message that we might be putting ourselves in danger by overdoing it unless we listen to them. There's also medical warnings like the one I had, for example, like a doctor telling you shouldn't play sport again, you shouldn't run again, you should be limiting your activities. Of course, that again can be even more powerful because we're getting that message from a figure of authority. So it tends to have more impact than if we get the message from a friend who's not a medical specialist. And there's also the element of pharmaceutical ads that we see all the time on TV or on radio stations. That it's very common, you know, for ads to start with someone who's in pain, like back pain. We get someone who's in this distressing, painful situation, and then he takes this pill or this medicine and feels better. And we're kind of groomed to believe that we will need this at some point. Through these ads, we grow up believing that, for example, back pain is a common thing, or that migraines are a common thing. That's the kind of message that they kind of convey, right? And this, of course, leads to what we call learned beliefs. Through all of these things, we build certain beliefs, okay? Even though some of them might not be true, such as the belief that wear and tear and repeated use of a body part can cause damage and chronic pain, as I mentioned before, okay? Or beliefs also specific to the sport, such as the belief that tennis players or rock climbers are prone to tennis elbow. In fact, even the condition itself refers to tennis in this case. And there's also golfer's elbow. So that's how ingrained certain beliefs are. And because these beliefs are fear-based, we obviously start to move about with fear. We start to doubt our movements sometimes. We start to wonder if we're overdoing it. And when we get into the cycle of fear, that is what actually feeds the nocebo effect. And as you might have guessed, fear is the main emotion that feeds this. If we weren't afraid, then we wouldn't be susceptible to the nocebo effect, right?
It's amazing to see how all of these factors work together, right? These are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. So if you think about the study that we shared earlier of 75% of athletes experience some sort of chronic pain, you know, the risk that is out there for taking on beliefs that are not true is huge. The societal conditioning, the pharmaceutical ads, like from the US where I'm from, the pharmaceutical ads are everywhere. And there's just this sense that, our bodies are weak, that we need some sort of pill or procedure or treatment in order to get better, in order to heal. And all of this contributes to this idea that, our bodies, in spite of, billions of years of evolution, are weak. And so unwinding these beliefs is a really, really key part of the healing process. And I will also add a really key part of athletic performance as well, right? When I started to unwind some of these beliefs of, not being able to do something on the bike or, not being strong enough compared to, other riders, kind of starting to pay attention to those beliefs that I had about myself and my performance, I noticed a remarkable shift in how I was approaching my sport and my activities.
Yes, Alec. Yeah, I fully agree with that. We have the thing is we make these beliefs our own eventually, so it doesn't even remain a case of others having to tell us this. We just adopt them as our own, and then we get this inner voice telling us, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. Oh, maybe this is too much. Maybe yesterday I've overdone it," and that can have such an impact both on chronic pain and on our own performance. True.
Absolutely. And in the next video, we're going to talk more in depth about the role of fear and how it generates chronic pain, as well as how chronic pain shows up in the brain.